This is as much warning as you're ever going to get on one of my videos. I'm not doing this stuff to be gross or creepy or anything. I'm just trying to educate some guys that want to know how to do this. If you don't like this sort of stuff, click off now. You've been warned. Alright guys, I'm going to try to keep this video short and to the point. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments down below and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. There are a lot of videos out there, a lot of information on the internet about how to do these European mounts, or European or white skull or bleach skull, whatever you want to call it. This is how I do it. Hopefully this helps you. Okay, so the stuff that you're going to need to do this, you're going to need, of course, a deer head. I'm working on two of them here. One's mine, one's my dad's. I've already skinned them out, so we're not going to go through that. I'm going to put a link in the comments section to another YouTuber who does, I think, the best job of describing how to do this that there is out there. It's Whiten Creations, and he does a lot of different kind of animals. I'm going to link to what I think is probably going to be the most helpful to you video for whitetails. So check that out in the comments. The equipment you're going to need, I boil mine and pressure wash them. So I'm using a canner with a turkey fryer, propane set up there. I got about 3 gallons of water in it. I'm going to get that up to a simmer, and I'm going to put about 2 cups. There's going to be about 3 gallons of water in there. I'm going to put about 2 cups of this Arm & Hammer super washing soda. I think the active ingredient in this is sodium carbonate, something like that. You got to put something like this in the water. I think Ryan likes that OxyClean stuff. You got to put something like this in the water, or you're going to end up boiling them for hours and hours and hours. When you put this stuff in the water, and you can pick this up at Walmart, and it's cheap too. You put that in the water, you only boil them for like 45 minutes. So it makes a huge difference. The less time you can boil them, the safer it is on the bone. So I've got a bucket where I'm going to keep my peroxide. I keep my peroxide through the season. I actually was a licensed taxidermist, so I don't do that anymore. I just do it for my own self. But I would keep my peroxide for 1 season and then I throw it away. The peroxide that I'm going to use is this 20 volume clear. Do not get the cream. You want the clear. It's a liquid. If you can't find 20 and you can get your hands on 40, dilute 40 in half with water to get 20. So I get this from Sally Beauty Supply. This stuff is reasonably inexpensive. I think I give $8 a gallon for this a few days ago. So 20 volume clear. Make sure it's the clear, which is the liquid. Out here, what I'm going to pressure wash with is a low PSI electric pressure washer. These are the cheapies you can get from Home Depot for like 60 or 80 bucks. I think this one's about 1200 PSI, maybe 1300. You don't want a big heavy gas pressure washer because some of those nose bones are fragile and you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble with heavy PSI. When you're boiling in that super washing soda, you don't need heavy PSI to clean these bones. So you're going to want something. You don't want to work on the gravel. Throw yourself down an old piece of plywood, a sheet of plastic or something. Or if you're working on concrete, even better. Otherwise, you're going to be blowing dirt and crap up out of the gravel. Is just going to be constantly coming up onto your head. So that's pretty much it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and flesh these heads out. I'm going to take off as much meat as I can, and I'm going to drop them in. I'm going to get this up to a simmer, 2 cups of that in about 3 gallons of water, and I'm going to simmer it for about 30 minutes. Take it out, pressure wash it, stick it back in the pot for about another 20 or 30 minutes. Pressure wash it again. By then that should take off 99% of the meat and stuff, and then I'm gonna simmer it in the 20 volume for about 10 minutes, no more than 15. That peroxide is actually eating that bone as you're simmering it in there. So you go over 15 minutes and you're going to destroy any skull. The big heavy bucks, the old bucks, they got real thick skulls. Their bone is a lot thicker than like a fawn or a doe or button buck. I've done all those, and those bones are really thin on those. These big bucks you can get away with a little more time in the peroxide. The little ones I probably wouldn't go much more than 8 or 10 minutes. depending on the animal. So anyhow, I'm gonna get busy fleshing these out. You're also probably wondering, that's a side of ribs. That deer there looked like it got hit by a car or something. These ribs are all busted up, and they look like they're, see them knots on there? They look like they've been broken, fused. So I figured, what the heck, I'm gonna be boiling stuff. I'm gonna boil them ribs just to see what they look like. I'm gonna get busy, flesh these out, cut off all the meat, cut out all eyeballs, take the bottom jaw, throw it away, and stick it in a pot, and I'll catch you guys up here as we go. I'm gonna show you little pieces of the whole process here. You really need to stick around toward the end for how to recolor the antlers, because just about any way you boil these things, you're gonna discolor down here, at least the burrs a little bit. You're gonna lose a little color. So stick around and I'll show you how I recolor the bases here. If nothing else, jump to the end of the video and see that. But I'm trying to give you information. Leave comments down below, any questions you got, and I'll try to help you out. Nearly forgot to talk to you about the tools on the workbench. The tools that I'm using are scalpel, number 4 handle with the 22 blades, just because the 22s are so cheap. You don't need those big long blades. You don't need a scalpel. I mean, you can do this with a knife. I just find it easier. To use scalpels. They're not that expensive, and it's really nice having super sharp blade all the time. Change them out when they get dull or they break. You can't be real abusive with them, you know, wiggling them and stuff. They ain't no pry tool, but I really like scalpels for this sort of stuff. These long-handled, I don't know what you call these things, these surgical clamps. These long-handled ones are great if you can find them. Get you a pair of these. Otherwise, you don't really need them. The short-handled ones are fine. If you can find a pair of these, that's almost a must-have, but not quite. The bare minimum you need is a pair of needle nose pliers. So sharp blade, some stuff to pull nose junk out, and you really will need a long-handled screwdriver, because you're going to be busting up bones up in the nose between the brain cavity and the sinus cavity. I like to knock some holes in there. So a long-handled flathead screwdriver is kind of that's an essential tool. So simple tools, probably stuff you got laying around, except for maybe the scalpel, but that's the hand tools that you'll need. The other things, I'm in jeans and a sweatshirt right here while I'm working on the workbench. Once I start using a pressure washer, I'm going to be wearing my rain gear. Cheap old yellow rain suit would be fine, but you're going to get covered in water and brains and all kind of good stuff when you start cleaning this skull out. So some kind of rain gear and boots. You're going to need some rain boots. Just the cheap old black rubber boots is fine. So I'm going to get busy on this, and I'll catch you guys up as we go. All right, so here's what your skull should look like, roughly. Get the eyeball out of it. There's a big chunk of fat behind the eyeball. A whole bunch of just, meat around here. It's kind of a pain to cut the neck off of this thing because just the way that the vertebrae attach to the base of the skull. You just got to kind of feel around in there to get that separated, but you end up with a pretty good chunk of material should come off of there before you stick it in a pot. So it ain't got to be perfect. Don't waste a whole bunch of time, because that super washing soda does a real good job of eating that stuff up. All right, so my pot didn't have enough water in it, and that was kind of by design. I had to add some cold water, so it's just now coming back up to a simmer. But I wanted to start with my water level low, so I put my skull in there and then topped it off. And I only want the water just to be above the skull, just to cover it. I'm trying to keep the antlers out of that water as much as possible. And the reason for that is it discolors the antlers even in the boil. The antlers are colored mostly by blood. So if you wash all the blood off the antlers, you bleach them out. And it may not be significant. Most people might not notice, but if you pressure wash that antler too much, also, you're going to take the color off the antler. It's blood down in all the nooks and crannies, and then whatever they rub on, tree bark and stuff like that, will make it different colors as well. But you want to try to keep your antlers up out of the water as much as possible. You have to get them in the water a little bit in order to cover the skull, but try not to try not to just dunk your whole antlers and all into water if you can help it. All right guys, so I set my alarm for 30 minutes when I put this in for the first simmer. You can see it's just barely simmering. And that's what it looks like after 30 minutes in the pot. So I'm gonna take this out, hit it with a pressure washer, and I'll probably spend, I'm gonna say it'll probably take me 20 minutes of pressure washing, and then I'll put it back in that same pot again, and we'll go from there. Now while that first head was simmering, I went ahead and cleaned this head up. So I'm gonna stick this one in, and I'm gonna set my timer for 30 minutes, and while I'm pressure washing the first one, this one will be cooking. All right, so when I set the second head in there, I had to top off the water just a bit again. So you can see, again, I want the water just covering the skull, but not up on the antlers very much. So it'll come up to a simmer, and I'll set my timer for 30 minutes. All right, so I was pressure washing on this one for about 20 minutes, and as you can see, I mean, it helped a bunch, but there's still, some problem areas on it. The areas that you want to really focus on are around the ears here, and the sinus. You cannot spray up in that sinus area too much. So you want to spray in that way, and you definitely want to spray down in that way as much as you can. When you stick your pressure washer in that hole there at the top of that vertebrae, the base of the skull there, it gets pretty, it's like a brain volcano erupts out of there. It's pretty gnarly stuff, so try not to get it all over you. What I'm going to do now for the next few minutes is I'm going to use my tools, and I'm going to pick at this flesh as much as I can. And there's two little bones here, this one and this one. Those broke when I broke the jaw off, so you get rid of those finally. You'll feel here that there is it's a round bony thing. That's the internal part of the ear. I'm going to take the screwdriver, and I'll probably take the screwdriver and my pliers, and I'm going to break that. This skull is not going to be anatomically correct when you get done with it. To do it the right way, to get it as clean as it needs to be so it doesn't stink, you have to break this out. There is fleshy material growing between bone in this area. So you're going to have to break these bones out. This little round thing, you're going to bust that out. That's real thin. You're then going to chip into the base of the skull here, get all those little bones broken out of there. Also, I'm going to go up in the nose here, and I'm going to rip out all those coiled up little bones. I'm going to rip all that out, but be careful that you don't get into this bone here. You can reach in from the inside and rip this bone out, so be careful. Also be careful up in here. You don't want to damage this. You can damage this from the inside also if you get the right angle with your screwdriver and stuff. So try to pull out all the fleshy material in through here, and there's a plate of bone that grows that separates between the sinus area and the base of the teeth. You want to pop that plate of bone out. This is cartilage here. This just rips right out fairly easily. So you want to get in there and separate. You want to be able to see into almost the base of the teeth there, and make sure you get all that flesh out of there. And then after that, we're going to stick it back in the pot again. You can see how much stuff I pulled out of that's pretty much out of the sinuses and the brain cavity. If you're going to do a true European mount, I think they cut off the base of the skull here. And if they do that, I think that takes off all that ear and the base of the skull there. So it would be so much easier to clean that out. But this is what it looks like when you get done, beating those ears apart and ripping all that stuff out of there, those little bones. And there's just so much flesh that grows between the bones. And then now you can see down in there through the sinuses, you can see real well, and actually you can start to see light through the where the brain was in there. Forgive me for not knowing the correct scientific terminology. I'm going to stick this back in the pot probably for another 20 minutes, and then we'll pressure wash it after that. And here's the second skull after 30 minutes in the boil and pressure washing for 15 minutes. Again, the biggest part of it comes off. Now I gotta pick around. You can see what's left up there in the brain cavity. Those ear nodules there, you can see pretty well on this one. And I'll bust out all those spiral bones up in through the sinus cavity. All right, so this was back into the pot for the second time for 20, I think it ended up being 22 minutes time I got it out. And then pressure washed it again, and I only needed to pressure wash it, well, I only hit it for about 10 more minutes. So this is pretty good. I can still see a little bit of like cartilage material up in that joint there. That I'll dig out with a screwdriver. This is another kind of problem area right here for some real thick cartilage material. I'll do a little whittling on that. And then up inside, you can see up inside the nose now how open all that is. I'll take a screwdriver and I'll try to show you here. I'm gonna take this is where I like that really long screwdriver, and I'm gonna push that screwdriver up into there, and I'm gonna kind of rake around and break up all that. It's kind of like, it reminds you of looking at a sponge. It's bone with fleshy material in it. So I'm gonna rake that around in there, and I'll end up knocking a hole through that clear into the brain cavity. So you'll be able to look through that hole then. See those two dark spots down there? I'm basically gonna knock those dark spots out, and I'm gonna take it back out to the pressure washer and blow down in there. Try to blow all that, you can kind of see it here. It's kind of dark up here on the skull. That's where there's fleshy material up under there still. So I'm gonna try to clean all that out from underneath. The areas that you really wanna watch, with your younger deer especially, you can get away with a lot with these older bucks. With your younger deer right here, you'll blow that bone out with your pressure washer. So be careful of that. And also kind of be careful up in here with the younger deer, again, especially, you can really damage that bone there. And you can kind of see it on that side as well. You know, these older bucks, I really haven't been being too careful with this one, because it's you know, again, these older bucks, they just got thicker bones, so you can get away with more. So I'm gonna rake around up in there, and I'll do some more pressure washing, and this thing will pretty much be ready for the peroxide bath then. Well, there they are. They're all cleaned up and ready for peroxide. So total boil time for these was 50 to 52 minutes each. And I was really trying to keep track of my time so I could, you know, tell you guys just exactly how long I'm doing it. The one of them ran a couple of minutes long on me before I could get to it. I heard my timer going off. I was out there with a pressure washer. So boiled them for 30 minutes, then pressure washed it, come back in, use the tools, pick at them, stick it back in, boiled again for 20 minutes, back outside, pressure wash it, come back in, pick at them again, and then hit them with a pressure washer again. And we're ready for peroxide. So it's getting kind of late tonight. I'll just kind of leave everything sit here, and tomorrow we'll come back. We'll dump the water out and put peroxide in that pot, and we'll start whitening these things. Okay, so here's the setup. I got the same pot. I dumped it out. This is the next day. I dumped out my pot, just dumped it out in the yard. You know, it's not toxic or anything like that. So I cleaned my pot out, put some dish soap in there, cleaned it up real good. And if you remember, the dimension on my old pot was 6.5 inches tall. Well, this canner is considerably taller than that. I really don't want to cut it down if I can help it, because it's nice to have those handles on there. But I don't want a really tall pot, because what happens is with a tall pot, your head sits more vertically. So you want a horizontal pot so that it's not a big deal when you're boiling them to clean them, but it gets to be a big deal when you're whitening them, because you don't want you want as little of the antler in the peroxide as possible. So the more your head lays back, kind of the better off you are. There's a certain angle that you try to hit just right, so you cover all the skull, but you don't get very much of the antler in the peroxide. Something else that I may do in an effort to keep the antler out of the peroxide. Sometimes it's kind of painstaking to do it this way, but it's worth it to recolor. If you can keep your bases up out of the peroxide considerably, which means that the level of the peroxide won't be quite to the top of the skull, you can sit here. This is a cheap chip brush. They sell these for like $1 at Walmart or whatever. You can just constantly keep soaking that the skull with peroxide. Just keep working peroxide over top of the skull there, and it's kind of a give and take thing. It's kind of painstaking. It does not do quite as good a job whitening. Sometimes you really got to get up under these bases, but you know, it will help you when you go to recolor your bases. So the other thing with that is get you a spray bottle and just put some cool fresh water in it, and spray your antlers down while you're whitening them. And that way, if you get any peroxide up on the antlers, you kind of spray that down and dilute that peroxide back off into them to keep the antlers from becoming discolored. So what I did here to make, you know, like I said, I put some mason jars in the bottom there, just little pint jars to try to take up some space so that I can sit that head down in there, and it kind of gives me the angle that I want. So I kind of dry fit it, make sure everything looks right, and then I'll put the peroxide in. It's a whole lot easier to kind of do this finagling around with this other, you know, mason jars and spacers and getting your angle right. It's a whole lot easier to do that without the peroxide in there, and you can kind of imagine where you want your line and everything. Make sure everything's going to fit just right. So now I'll go ahead and dump the peroxide in. I should probably have taken the opportunity before, but I'm going to do it now to talk about the safety aspect of dealing with this peroxide. I'm going to put it in layman's terms. This shit will eat you up. Don't get it on your skin. I'm boiling it in a pot. I'm out in the shop. I got nothing around me. I don't want any little kids running around here. I don't want any dogs running around here. I don't got to worry about none of that stuff. I can make a mess on the floor. It's not a big deal. I also keep, well, it's a half a bucket of water. I keep that real handy in case I get some on my skin. And then I've got the hose on. I make sure I turn my hose on and at least have it hooked up to the pressure washer or something. But I make sure I've got plenty of water around here. You know, in case something stupid were to happen, that pot fall over and I splash it all over me, get it on my face, this shit can blind you. So this is not something to take lightly. So keep that in mind, guys. Safety first. Keep you some water around where you can dilute it down and it won't burn you as bad. Be very careful with this stuff. All right, so I got my pot full of peroxide, much as it looks like I'm going to need. And when that gets up to temperature, when it starts to boil, I'm going to turn it down to a simmer. I just want it to be barely simmering. I definitely don't want the surface of the water to be rolling boil and splashing and bubbling and stuff. So you just want it to simmer. I've also gotten my pressure washer and my board out there. I put on my rain gear, so as soon as I'm going to set my timer for 12 minutes. When I put the skull in, I'm going to hit my timer button. I'm going to sit here with my paintbrush, and I'm going to like coat the top of the head continually, because I think I'm going to leave the top of the head stick out of the peroxide just enough so that I can keep the biggest part of the bases of antler up out of the peroxide. So I'm going to sit here for that 12 minutes, and I'm just going to continually brush hot peroxide over the top of that skull. And any little splashes, I'm going to be squirting the antlers. Again, it's a painstaking process. It's kind of a pain in the ass being hunched over this pot for 12 minutes, but it will save you a lot of time when you go to recolor those bases. So as soon as my 12-minute timer goes off, I'm going to take that head straight out to the board, and my pressure washer, I've got an adjustable tip on it. I've got it set to a gentle fan spray, where before, when I was cleaning the meat off of the bones, I was using a more aggressive stream. But now I just want to, when I use it now, I just want to be sure to get all the peroxide off, get up in all the cracks and crevices, and I'm not so much worried about cleaning the skull as I am getting the peroxide off of it good. So that's why you don't need a real aggressive stream right now. So as soon as this gets up to temp, I'm gonna stick the head in there, set my timer for 12 minutes. Okay guys, this is what I'm gonna be doing for 12 minutes. Just trying to keep the top of the skull covered in this hot peroxide. Try not to splash it up on the bases. And in this, see, now you can see what I'm talking about. Like, I'm keeping the biggest part of the bases out of the peroxide by doing it this way. Otherwise, almost the entire burl and everything would be up under there. So this saved me a lot of time later. Well, that was 12 minutes in the peroxide boil and then out to pressure wash the whole skull again, one more time over. And it is gleaming white. This is a side-by-side comparison. This one has not been whitened yet. It's kind of a dingy off-white, like an egg. It's not even an egg. It's almost a yellowish. It's probably not going to show up real well on camera here, but lighting's not great out here in the shop. I mean, a guy could hang that up on the wall, but if you're going to do, you know, all the trouble, you might as well make it look really nice. And I think that whitening them makes them look a whole lot nicer. You can see what I talked about discoloring the bases there. So it's worth the extra effort with that paintbrush so that you don't have to recolor all this, because, you know, whatever's in the peroxide gets bleached out. So it doesn't look like that saved much, but I'm telling you, that's a lot of time and patience to recolor. So it's definitely worth doing that paintbrush and sitting there with it. So the next step is going to be, well, for one, I got to whiten that one now, and then we're going to take both of these inside down in my basement. I got a small little table set up, and we're going to let them dry overnight. We're going to put a fan on them, let them dry good, and I'll catch you guys up after that. All right, guys. Well, unfortunately, this video is getting really long, so I had to split it in half, or I'm never going to get it to upload. Little teaser right there. So click part 2, and you'll get to see the rest of this video.